I think the first question that we want to have is have you guys answer, can you guys introduce yourselves, your background, your day-to-day jobs? And I guess Dr. Miller, you can start first.
Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Rainisha Miller. I am currently staff counselor and the coordinator of services for Black students at the Counseling Center. My background is in counseling psychology. That's what I have my PhD in. And particularly, I specialized in minority mental health, specifically looking at the ways in which um, individuals, multiple marginalized identities intersect to impact their mental health, how they navigate the world, and how they see themselves, and also taking this knowledge and curating it to develop services. Interventions and programming that specifically speak to the needs of marginalized identities on a college university setting.
Dr. Haskins. Wait, I'm not.
We can't hear you, Dr. Haskins.
Your audio is connecting.
I'm happy to go ahead while we're waiting for Dr. Haskins to get connected. So I am Dana Cunningham. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work with the University of Maryland in Baltimore through as part of the Department of Psychiatry at the School of Medicine. Even though I work there, I did a lot of my work in actually Prince George's County, Maryland. The director of a school mental health program. Okay. Oh, she's connected. So I'm the director of a school mental health program that we have in Prince George's County, and we provide counseling and support services to students who are in special education there. Also the vice president of community outreach and engagement for Black Mental Wellness, which is a corporation that was developed to help provide information and resources to the Black community, really focused on really helping to spread information about mental health and really help to decrease the stigma around mental health in the Black community.
Great. Sorry about that. I'm used to using my headphones, and I think the computer didn't recognize me without it. So good to be with you all. I'm Dr. Deborah Haskins, and I am a recently retired since 2019 tenured associate professor of counseling at Trinity Washington University, and directed 3 graduate programs, 2 school counseling, 1 clinical mental health counseling. But I was also at Loyola University, Maryland for 16 years actually, training psychologist students to be in master's level clinicians and undergrads. I'm currently teaching at Hopkins, the diversity in psychology course, which Tempest is a great student and has invited me to participate. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor by professional identity, and I have a PhD in pastoral counseling. My research areas has always focused on cultural competency and culturally integrated mental health counseling, including integration of faith and spirituality in service delivery, because particularly I felt that communities of color often don't seek traditional mental health because it's not been a system designed for us. And so a lot of the work that I do is similar to Dr. Miller and Dr. Cunningham. I basically have focused for the last 30 years basically on community mental health and trying to provide healing opportunities for people who aren't always going to seek traditional mental health. I do a lot of work with faith communities and spiritual communities. I also serve on the board of ordained ministry for the Baltimore Washington United Methodist Church, and I co-chair the psychological review process for candidates for ministry. And I'm also a gambling disorders leader and scholar and specialist. So I say all that to say, at the end of the day, I'm usually tired. No, but I enjoy a lot of what I do. So it's great to be here with you all.
Thank you everyone for the introduction. If you guys have questions, you can also just type them into the chat
Okay.
and we'll be moderating them. But I think the next question is, how did you guys become interested in mental health? And we can go in the same order.
How did I become interested in mental health? I think for me, my interest came about later in my life. After my undergraduate experience, I lived in Indonesia for about 2 years as a Fulbright scholar. And so the first year I was an English teacher in a rural area of Eastern Indonesia on the island called East Java. And so I was teaching about 250 students. And I noticed that there were a group of students that looked like me, looked Black, looked African American, but they were Indonesian. They were a part of the Aborigines people of Indonesia and originated in the western part of the islands of Indonesia. And so I noticed that my students, they are known as Papuan, my Papuan students were learning at a far lower rate than all the other students. They were a lot more shy in class, not really wanting to speak up. Um, and I took it upon myself to get to know these students a little bit more. And we tended to connect over Christmas and Mariah Carey. Because those are two of the things that they learned about the States and wanted to know a lot about from me. And so as I started to connect with my students, their Christian faith was very, very important to them, which is very significant because Indonesia is more than 80% Muslim. And so the western part of the islands tend to be more Christian. And so we connected in those terms. And so I would go to church with them on Sundays. And so after about a month or so of doing this and spending more time with my students and getting to know them, I realized that their performance in the classroom changed significantly. They were doing better on homework assignments, they were participating more, and their confidence just skyrocketed. And so, what that made me question was when we're talking about communities who are traditionally excluded from mainstream society, keeping in mind um, Papua and Aborigines cultures of Indonesia, they are isolated from the rest of the islands. And so traditionally, they're thought to be far more behind in development than other parts of Indonesia, right? And so this made me think more globally and more specifically back home to, some of the things that I was seeing as a kid growing up, seeing how some of my friends were struggling or people in my community and wondering how would that struggle or that challenge change if someone took interest, took the time to figure out what it was like for them, their lived experience, and how connecting and understanding could virtually shift their mental health challenges in a positive direction. So I ended up doing a bilingual study in Indonesia that I ended up presenting to Indonesian government officials as well as American ambassadors as a way to continue to promote the Fulbright program from the perspective that utilizing social support networks in the classroom, especially in populations that are historically disenfranchised, has a tendency to boost performance. And so it was that experience, that study, that made me want to go back and study counseling psychology. I think I literally ended my 2 year stint in Indonesia. I think it was May, the end of May. And I literally flew from Indonesia to Oklahoma to begin my PhD program. I was only in the States for about 10 days before the first day of class started. And it was that experience that made me want to look at, how are marginalized communities existing in the world, and how is their existence impacted by various factors, and really trying to see how mental health isn't just an internal phenomena, right? There are a lot of external things that can impact how we see ourselves and how we navigate our mental health. And so that's pretty much how I got started. And I hit the ground running, and I haven't stopped in that work. So, yeah.
All right, thanks so much for sharing that, Dr. Miller. So interesting to hear your story, but so pivotal in terms of the work that you've done. And I think just, highlighting your experience with so just how important that connection is. When we try to think about, the best ways to reach young people and to help support folks, what are the key components of, effective therapeutic intervention. The core is having that connection and building connections with people and with communities. So, you have a good relationship with someone, that is 90% of what we do in terms of making an impact. So my story, I was one of I don't want to say very few, but I kind of like in high school, I knew I wanted to go into psychology. So a lot of times when I tell people this story, like, oh, a lot of people are like, oh, you didn't really know, you wanted to be a therapist that early, but I did. So back in high school, I took a psychology class, and, I was just kind of always really interested in learning more about behavior and why people did the things that they did, just kind of understanding personality a little bit more. And so I just went straight through, undergrad to grad school. And, along the way, different experiences I had just really reinforced that was what I was supposed to do. Hearing Dr. Miller talk about, just sort of the impact that she had in working with the young people that she encountered. I've worked in schools for probably, almost in or with schools probably for the last 20 years or so. And just being able to see, schools as an opportunity or a venue to provide support to students who wouldn't normally receive services is really very fulfilling for me. You're able to see students, kind of grow and develop over time, and just know that we're having such a enormous impact on their mental health and well-being has been really encouraging. So, and then, just have continued to expand that in different avenues, particularly like with Black mental wellness and other things. So, so I started early, but I'm still very passionate about mental health in the field.
It's great to hear my colleagues talking. Dr. Cunningham, I think, actually was one of our site supervisors, if I remember right, Dr. Cunningham.
I was, yes, I had an excellent extern.
Yeah, so I was glad to see your name on the panel. So I actually made a career change, and I actually had gotten my A degree in legal secretary. And even though I went to an all college prep school, I was one of those students who the research talks about, students of color who don't get access and equity, even though you are in college prep programs. First generation student, attended college in my family, and despite being here in Baltimore and being right down the street from Loyola University of Maryland, where I ended up teaching and working for 16 years, I don't recall having the same career counseling opportunities and guidance in the schools than my white counterparts did, and European students. So I basically had a different career and worked here in Baltimore, got my bachelor's degree, and made a career change, even though I minored in psychology. I think that was sort of the beginning of me really having an interest in psychology and human behavior. And I think when I came back to Baltimore after my bachelor's degree, like most college students, you're searching who you are and trying to discover you know, who am I going to be, and what do I feel passionate about? And I think I tell people that I was called into counseling, and I think it came out of a spiritual transformation journey for me, where I was really, I think, struggling like a lot of college students, trying to find my place in the world. And I think through my own sort of faith journey, and talking to God, I somehow got led also to being a counselor. And part of it, I think, came about because I was a resident advisor in my undergrad. And that I really enjoyed, helping students at college. And, you know, I was teaching human sexuality, for example, teaching racial awareness. And I was always a very shy. People would never believe that. Tempest probably would be shocked to know this. You would never know that in the classroom and the work that I do, but I was very introverted and very shy. And college was really where I blossomed and grew up. And I think that's why I love working with college students, because it's such a great opportunity of growth. And so I got my master's in counseling. My first career was working as a college counselor at Montgomery College, which is the largest community college in the state of Maryland. But before I ended up there, I was a residence hall director at the American University, and I did a quarter rotation in the University Counseling Center. And I want to share that because during that time at AU, this was in 1984 when I started working at American University. And I had the athletes for 1 year, which was a big disaster. The second year, I had the international students, 400 students in a learning community, which I absolutely loved. And so during that quarter time, I was working in a psychodynamic university counseling center, which actually psychoanalytic. It's kind of a shock. I was telling my students, you know, very few counseling centers are psychoanalytic today. But they also did community outreach to the college community. And my role was to help the consulting psychologists understand how to reach out and support students of color at American University. And part of that was talking to students and finding out why they weren't coming in for counseling services. And I was trying to help the all-white university psychologist staff understand Black students. And this was during a time when apartheid was live and well. And we were advocating at American University to get them to create a minority student office for faculty, staff, and students. And this was right during apartheid advocacy. And it was a very challenging time. And I was the chair of what was called the Black Coalition, which, you know, people who know me growing up would never imagine that I would be in this space. But it goes to show you how you can grow when you grow in college, that you can start using your voice. So for me, I kind of fell into it later. And then from working at the community college, I just felt that I wasn't helping people who were in greater need. I really felt a conflict because Montgomery County has one of the highest per capita incomes in the United States. And I just didn't feel that for me as a person of color, of African descent, even though Montgomery College was largely very culturally diverse, the campus I worked at for 8 years was like 90% ethnically diverse. We had a lot of students from Africa and a lot of students from Asia and a lot of students from other countries, Latinx, but I just felt like I needed to be doing more for the community that I'm a part of. And so I decided to get my PhD in pastoral counseling and advance my clinical skills. And I really wanted to also do research as well as community wellness and consultation. And so that's basically, everything that I'm doing now. And so the research and writing that I do, like I did a book chapter on psychotherapy with African Americans, for example, and people of African descent in 2014. I do a lot of writing on psychotherapy and culturally based mental health, and including spiritual based wellness as well.
All right. Thank you all.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answers. Like, that was actually really helpful. And I think that kind of goes into our next question I think that kind of leads into our next question. What are the most common mental health issues you have seen among students our age in these marginalized communities?
Did you want us to go in any kind of order, or?
Anyone can answer.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to say, I'll have to share, as when I was department chair at Trinity, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Trinity Washington University. It's in DC. It's on the same street as Catholic University. And what was interesting at Trinity, when you look at the student population, it's really a historically Black university. The student population is like 65% African descent, 25% Latinx, about 1 to 2% European, and Asian descent maybe 3 to 4%, and other, multiracial, biracial. And what was striking for me as department chair recently, and I was there for 8 years, and then at Loyola, and it was, of course, being at a university where you have predominant students of color, what was really clear was that these students often are facing tremendous mental health challenges, unlike the European students, for example. And what was striking at Trinity was that many of these students, which is probably similar to students of color at Hopkins, are coming in with a lot of pressures culturally that white students don't have. And so many of these students are breathing through, and I have to say this tonight because we just heard the verdict of the George Floyd verdict. And I can't present tonight without, just thanking God, honestly. And I'm just going to be real authentic with this, that honestly, a lot of us probably did not anticipate that the verdict would be a just verdict. And the fact that this man showed no emotion at all is really telling. But that situation that we're all breathing through around the United States, but in breathing through in Black and Brown communities of color, Indigenous communities, is a highlight of the challenges that students of color and students that are diverse, not just of color diversity, but intersectionality of identities as well, are having to manage. At the same time, we're also trying to study. And I talked recently, I was asked to be on a radio show last summer, DC, WTOP, I think. And she was asking me about the impact of the murders and the police brutality and community violence on students of color and people of color. And I said that it's very difficult for us to breathe through these experiences of social injustice, but it's very difficult to focus when this is happening. And it's not just happening to people out there, because when it happens to them, it happens to all of us. Because most of us who are people of color culturally and cultural beings, we are very communal and very connected. And so it's very painful. And so I think the mental health challenges are very different. and very huge. And part of it, what I noticed when I was in my role, even at Loyola, and being a clinician at a university counseling center, is that the students oftentimes don't have the same same equitable experiences that the white students have. You know, for example, when I got my PhD, I didn't get any mentoring for peer-reviewed publications at all, not one. I didn't get any support for applying for tenure track positions at all. I didn't get any invitations to be on research teams, whereas my white counterparts, student scholars did. And so we oftentimes don't have the same equitable experiences. And you're noticing that, but you almost can't say anything about it, because then that becomes another issue. And then most students, you really want to finish, and you want to finish strong. And there's always this complication that you also need the faculty to write letters of recommendation. So I don't want to monopolize the time, but I think that I'm very attuned, and also being a department chair, of having to look out for the self-care of the student population, which was predominantly of color, but then also being in predominantly white university spaces where the students of color were, and students who were from other identities, sexual identity differences, non-heterosexual, student who was transitioning from non-binary, and a student who's from, these students who were struggling with just normal university life and academic experience, but also had their own other experiences that they were trying to navigate. And so I think it can be a lot of isolation and a lot of alienation. And I know that one of the questions we'll get to is to talk about what are some things that you all can do, and what are some resources.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haskins. I think you covered great ground. But one of the things that I kind of want to highlight that you mentioned, so I don't know if I mentioned this, and it could have just been, I wasn't thinking, but I work at Hopkins in the counseling center. So I have been working in college university counseling centers for the span of my time doing mental health work. And there is a poll that's taken yearly to kind of get a sense of what are the typical mental health challenges for college and university students. And it's the Center for Collegiate Mental Health. And in their 2019 report, they stated that depression and anxiety are by far the top two presenting concerns across all college age students. Now, in the work that I do, I tend to utilize an intersectional approach. So understanding the various ways in which our social identities intersect to create the whole of our experience. But the part of intersectionality that I tend to focus on is the ways in which multiple marginalized identities intersect to create the whole of students' experiences. So when you take that intersectional approach, looking at multiple marginalized identities, one of the things that I tend to notice about my students who identify with marginalized social backgrounds is that in addition to the depression and anxiety that students may be feeling, and Dr. Haskins mentioned some of these, by way of their social identity, they may also battle with issues related to internalized discrimination, a sense of needing to be perfect, so perfectionism, which is tied to imposter syndrome. So this idea that I'm not supposed to be here and I'm actually not what everybody thinks that I am academically. And so they're going to find out and I'm going to get put out of school, right? And then sometimes that can be amplified by the day-to-day microaggressions that students may feel in the classroom as they're walking across campus, professors, doing the egregious acts of microaggressions. And then related to that, feeling isolated, Dr. Haskins mentioned this, isolated, silenced, and invisible. And so, as you can imagine, as you're navigating all of these things with anxiety and depression um, being um, likely to be experiences, it intensifies some of these mental health concerns that marginalized students are experiencing that maybe their cis heteronormative white counterparts are not experiencing, right? And also related to that, one of the things that I've also noticed, and this will be my last piece, and Dr. Cunningham, jump in here, is that, you know, a lot of students from marginalized backgrounds tend to not seek help, right? And a lot of times, this decreased help seeking behaviors are related to mental health stigmas that may exist in various communities, a lack of representation and visibility. So basically, if I don't see anybody on staff who looks like me, I'm not going to them for help. They're not going to understand me, what they know about my life, you know? And then related to that, a lack of knowing how. So because of the traditional and historical exclusivity of some of these social institutions, being higher learning and then mental health services, some students from marginalized backgrounds just don't know how to access these services or which channels to take. And so sometimes all of those things combined decrease the likelihood that the students who need the help the most are actually not going to be reaching out and getting those services. So yeah, I'll just stop right there. Dr. Cunningham, jump on in here.
No, you all said it all so well. I don't know that I have much more to add. And I don't work directly with college students, providing services. You all are kind of, closer to it than I am. I will say, through Black Mental Wellness, we have a college ambassador program. And so I am connected with some college students via that. And, they've certainly, one of the big things they've talked about this year that's been really challenging is certainly imposter syndrome. That is definitely a big issue, dealing with the re-traumatization that we experience by all of the exposure to the murders of Black and Brown people, and just really the need to protect yourself and, engage in your own self-care. And obviously COVID has been huge for so many students. At college, you go to college expecting to have certain experiences. And for us, we talked about how we're communal people, right? We like to engage, we like to socialize and be with people. And when you can't do that, when that's limited, that's definitely going to have an impact on, for some people on their mental health as well. And so, been trying to find other ways to connect and to really, again, make sure they're focusing on own self-care, just dealing with anxiety as well, and depression has been really big.
All right, thank you so much, guys. That was all really amazing answers. I just wanted to point out when y'all said in the chat that if you guys have questions, you can also put them in the chat. Another question we had before we run out of time is, what resources are available on campus for mental health? And I think this one, we can start with Dr. Miller for this one.
Yes. So believe it or not, we actually have a lot of resources at Hopkins for students. And recently, the university is moving to become less decentralized. And so what that means is we're all trying to work together, because what we were finding that there are so many different departments doing the same thing. And it can also oftentimes feel like, where do I go? What do I do? So the Counseling Center is a part of a collective of services that are devoted towards making sure students are connected, students' mental health needs are addressed. So of course we have the counseling center and we service all students. I think the beautiful thing about the counseling center though is we are shifting with the current social climate as well as the current need for our students who identify within BIPOC communities as well as other marginalized communities. And so, like myself, we have multiple coordinators who specifically address the issues related to various communities. So I'm the coordinator of services for Black students. We have a coordinator for Latinx students, for LGBTQIA+, for international students, for first generation, low income students, just to name a few. And so these identity-based services are going to take into account some of these intersectional issues that students are dealing with on top of their mental health and addressing them. We also work heavily with the Office of Multicultural Affairs. That is also a great resource for students on campus who may not feel comfortable going to the student health and well-being center or going to CHU on campus. Stopping at the Office of Multicultural Affairs is a great resource. And some of those staff members there are amazing. All of them are amazing and can direct you more readily to all of those different resources. So yeah, those are the biggest ones that come out to mind for me: the Counseling Center, OMA, Student Health and Wellbeing, CHU, SOS, Student Outreach Services are just a few.
I'm a big fan of counseling for everyone. I think that, as one of my good friends, who was my mentor, Dr. Danelda Cook, who's a counseling psychologist also, and was last at Loyola University by way of University of Maryland. And she told me some years ago that it's good to see a therapist because you're gifting yourself the gift of self-care. It's good to see a therapist because now this is a person that can help care for you. And I think that is really what happens in therapy because, a lot of times we know in our families, particularly of cultural families that are very collective and communal, we rely on each other. We rely on our immediate family, our extended family. There's a lot of strength and resiliency that comes with those family relationships. But the other reality is that most people of color, particularly of African descent, Latinx, and many other cultural communities, indigenous, don't embrace mental health traditionally. And we know there's a historical reason for that. It wasn't a system designed for us, by us, for us. And so people still don't really even see that it's a system for us. There's just not enough of us reflected in these healthcare systems for people to feel safe again, to trust their heart and their soul. So that being said, I do think that is the challenge, but I definitely believe that if you can find a therapist, and it may be that maybe you don't feel comfortable seeing someone in the University Counseling Center. Maybe I would highly recommend that for the Hopkins students or students who are any campus, because I was a college counselor and I know the value of it. It's easy, it's there, but sometimes that may not feel safe for students, and they may feel safer participating with someone off campus. Because of COVID right now, with telehealth making mental health delivery so accessible, it really opens up the opportunity for people to also participate if you have the affordability, and you don't feel that you want to go to the University Counseling Center. Like Dr. Miller, I don't know where the University Counseling Center is now, but when I was going there to do the trainings on some years ago. This was back when I was at Loyola and would do spiritual and religious integration at the University Counseling Center. I remember it was in the one building and you took the elevator up on the 3rd floor. And it just seemed like there was a little bit of maybe some anxiety, like, is anybody going to see me? Going to the counseling center. So sometimes those tensions can exist for students who don't want to be discovered accessing. But I'm also a big fan of bibliotherapy. I think that for some people, my experience, especially working in the community, is that a lot of people aren't rushing to therapy. And so they may start with bibliotherapy. And that means, just doing some reading in the comfort of your home and whatever space you're in. And there's some really good books. I'm going to actually email to Tempest so that she can share it with you, but I want to just share some of the titles. One book called The Color of Hope, People of Color, Mental Health by Arisha Pickett is a really good book that's available. And it also includes discussions for college students. Also, Real Talk for When There's Nowhere to Go But Up, Black Pain, It Just Looks Like We're Not Hurting, is a really good book by Terry Williams. And she writes a lot about her own experiences with depression and anxiety. There's another good book called Soothe Your Nerves, The Black Woman's Guide to Understanding and Overcoming Anxiety, Panic, and Fear by Dr. Angela Neal Barnett. Preventing Bipolar Relapse is a book for students who may have bipolar. My best friend has bipolar and is managing that quite well for the last 30, probably 5 years. I've considered her to be my hero by watching her. Another excellent book is Willow Weep for Me. I don't know if any of you have heard about this book, but this book was written actually when I was at Loyola. It's written by Mary Nana Ama Dankwa. And she writes a memoir of her lifelong fight to identify and overcome depression. And she talks about what it was like to be Black female and battling depression, and even in her family. And Mary's sister was a Loyola undergrad student at the time when I was there. And we actually had Marie, might not be pronouncing her name correctly, come on campus, and we did like a book signing and had her share about her memoir and her journey of recovering and managing depression. And part of her sharing was talking about the challenge of being honest with her family about her struggle with depression and what messages she heard about it. Like, for example, grandmother would say, just rest your nerves, when this person really was having panic attacks, or if there was trauma, like sexual trauma, and that a lot of mothers and parents don't believe their child or adolescent or even adult person who's coming to tell them their truth, because that is something that has been historically silenced for generations, not just in society. It's coming out, it's more vocal now, but in many families, nobody really talked about these experiences. So I think that bibliotherapy is a real help. And then I also think, I want to thank Dr. Miller and Dr. Cunningham for your recommendations, because I think what helped me as a student of color was connecting to cultural groups that look like me, like this group that you're in, that can understand my voice and my spirit and my story and my journey, even though we may have different journeys. And we have like a sisterhood, we have a brotherhood, we have a kinship as cultural people, that we can support one another. And another recommendation I have is to find someone externally if you need to as well. So say you don't have the support that you need on campus. I hope and pray that you do, but I definitely am a big believer to build your village also externally. So some of my support even today are people who are like everywhere, places I've worked, people where I've studied, people I've met at conferences, people are doing good work that we're doing, like we're doing. And you can, we text each other, we call each other. When we experience racial microaggressions and social injustices, we can reach out to support one another. And sometimes it's just hearing the other person say, you're not losing your mind, you're not going crazy. Actually, what you're experiencing is I understand it, it's normal, and it's unacceptable. And I'm here to help you breathe through it. So those are just some of the things. And I'm a big fan also of music. I like music, and music for me is healing. And so for me, I surround myself with music. I grew up, my family, the family that we created, we always, it's music is usually happening in the environment. And so on any given day, I mean, I'm always usually having, I'm a big fan of gospel music, but anything that can help you, like one of my favorite songs is one by Nashville Live. And when those young people start dancing and singing, I'm shouting. I'm on my feet dancing. Like Tempest, you wouldn't imagine this because you're a student in my class, but usually, like sometimes I open up supervision with my supervisee, who is a psychologist, but going for her professional counselor licensure because she, for whatever reason, didn't want the psychologist licensure. And so I open up supervision playing a song that, music has always been a healing force for many cultural people. Dance, music, drama, right? So whatever you have to do that can help you dance in your atmosphere, wherever you are, I pray and encourage you to do it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Cunningham, did you have anything to add?
No, I was actually just responding to somebody's question in the chat about resources. So on blackmentalwellness.com, we do have several different fact sheets about different mental health disorders and issues. And there's also a link to different resources on coping and wellness. Another really good resource is, many of you probably have these already, but there's a lot of different mental health apps that you can use, that provide mindfulness and relaxation strategies and kind of reminders about different self-care things that can be helpful. But we actually have a fact sheet, a resource on our website that goes through like how to find a therapist if you're looking for one, kind of questions to ask, what to look for, and not to be afraid to look around. And, we shop around for the best pair of jeans, so we can also shop around for the best therapist that works for us. I also see the question about stigma. I think, what you all are doing now is great and kind of having these conversations. And if there are opportunities to do things, more broader across campus, I'm sure your counseling department probably has some things related to like mental health awareness and things like that. But I think the more, you can't get out and just normalize these conversations. If that there's, this week, this month, this year has been heavy, right, for everybody. So, just if you have a friend you're concerned about, you can kind of say, hey, I know this has been a really difficult year, difficult week. I'm feeling kind of anxious and depression. How have you been dealing with everything that's going on? I think just normalizing that it's okay not to be okay, and to kind of have those conversations and not to be hesitant to bring it up. Especially if you're concerned about a friend or a loved one, just let them know that you've noticed some things that have been a little bit different, some changes, and you just kind of want to check in.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham, because I wanted to hit on those questions too. I think the other question that I saw was the way you have seen gender roles affect mental health in marginalized communities. One of the particular ways that I've seen that is specifically with my Black identifying, woman identifying clients who may, this issue of anger, right? And so specifically in today's society, when we are dealing with so much, as Dr. Cunningham mentioned, the pandemic, the social unrest related to police killings, these situations are anger inducing. And so a lot of times I see my Black and woman identifying clients suppressing anger, and that being connected to the stereotype that is prevalent of the angry Black woman. There's a lot of research that suggests that there are gendered ways in which we express emotions based on our social our social socialization processes, gender socialization processes. So men are okay to be angry, but women shouldn't be angry, right? And so what that can do, chronic suppression of any type of emotion can lead to mental health concerns, and specifically the chronic suppression of anger can lead to anxiety, depression, and in some cases I've seen suicidality. So oftentimes the ways in which we're socialized gender-wise, and who can experience what emotions, the political ways that emotionality is oftentimes passed down to us, is replicated in how we express, how we respond to and express ourselves to situations that are going on in our lives and around us. So that was a great question. I'm glad someone asked that.
All right. Also, for the sake of time, would it be possible for people to email you with questions after this meeting? Okay. All right. I think we can. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Chioma, I just want to interject. I selected the 2 raffle winners, so I messaged the winners. So if you guys can check your chat and just reply to me, so I know you guys saw the message. And congrats to those who won, and to those who didn't. Don't worry, we will have more raffles in the future.
All right, and we'll be sharing the emails in our recap emails.
And I can also share the book list and the resource Dr. Haskins just put in the chat. I'll also include that in the recap.
I'll send you a list of these titles right after the session, and the therapist list as well. But I hope I want to put in a bonus, since you all have met Dr. Miller on this panel. I think she would be a great resource for you all, because you already know, I mean, she's amazing. And I wish that I had someone like Dr. Miller and Dr. Cunningham. If I had known therapists like them, I would definitely have checked out the University Counseling Center while I was at my universities.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time, Dr. Miller, Dr. Cunningham, Dr. Haskins. It was really a pleasure having you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate
A
it.
pleasure, and congrats to you all for what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.